When we look at the information that we have had over the last few weeks and months, we've seen that there are many concerns, and there are many people confirming what we know. There's not enough information when it comes to the risk to our water, our environment, and our health, and that's why a Liberal government would impose a moratorium on hydraulic fracturing.
Translation, a moratorium on jobs. That was Liberal Premier of New Brunswick, Brian Gallant. That was him in the lead up to his election this September. He wants to impose a moratorium on fracking in this province, but why? A new Fraser Institute study looks at the economic benefits of fracking here in Canada. It says there are no unmanageable risks justifying a ban. Canada's unconventional gas reserves, which could be developed through fracking, have an estimated value of, get this, up to $4.6 trillion. So what do we have to lose? Ken Green is the Fraser Institute's Natural Resource Study Director, and he joins us with more from Calgary. Ken, I don't get it. I mean, if the fisheries just disappear, if there's no market for coal or steel, I understand that. But I have never seen what until what's happened recently with Quebec, Nova Scotia, New Brunswick imposing a ban on fracking jobs. It's one thing if the jobs aren't there, but to actually ban a kind of job, that just sounds crazy, Ken.
It is really unusual. When you think about the history of technological development and things, all the things that have been invented, the number of times you impose a moratorium are really, really few and far between. And generally speaking, they're justified because there's immediate peril to a large number of people to justify the extraordinary step of the government coming in and basically saying, you can't engage in this perfectly legal, profitable activity that you're trained for and that you have private capital to do. So it really is an extraordinary event to see bans like this. And as you said, we surveyed the literature. We looked at the findings of governmental groups, particularly, and I was interested particularly in governmental groups that are very, very cautious. They take a precautionary principle approach. They're exceedingly cautious and careful. And those government bodies don't support moratoria. They do not come up with enough information or risks to justify a moratorium.
Well, of course not. I mean, like fracking sounds newfangled perhaps in places like New Brunswick and Quebec, but fracking's been done since the 40s. It started in the United States in the 40s, been done over 1 million times there, been done probably close to 500,000 times in Canada now, like seriously, about 200,000 times in Alberta alone. So it may seem really new and scary to politicians who have low information, but for those of us getting rich in Alberta, BC, and Saskatchewan off fracking, it's just, I mean, in fact, 90% of conventional oil and gas wells, of all oil and gas wells in North America, other than the oil sands, are fracked. This really bugs me, though, Ken, because here's my point. We talked about how much value there is. Your study talks about the wealth in this oil and gas. You know, these jurisdictions that are banning fracking, they're happy to take the profits from the have provinces that frack. I don't understand the mentality that says, we won't allow fracking here, but we'll take transfer payments from you fracking provinces to subsidize our bad policy decisions. What do you have to say about that?
Well, you know, Ezra, people respond to incentives, right? So if you can get free money, if you can simply take the money from someone else rather than do the work and take the small but real but small risks locally, or you can pander to your population that simply doesn't want something without paying the price for that pandering, you're going to do it. If you're a politician, you're likely to do it. And that's what we're seeing, which is jurisdictions that can say, you know, well, my people don't, some of my environmentalists don't like this, so I'm going to say no to it because I know that I'm going to get the money from elsewhere. And in fact, if I were to do the fracking here, by hydraulic fracturing here, I might lose some of my transfer payments. And so, you know, they're enabled by the incentives of the system to say no to things that are not necessarily rational decisions.
Yeah. You know, we understand why the government bans certain things. It's to protect interests. I'm just thinking of, for example, our dairy quotas or our poultry quotas. That's to protect farmers in the system from other competitors. So at least we can say, well, we know whose back is getting scratched here. It's the part of the cartel. But the crazy thing is, by banning fracking in places like New Brunswick and Quebec, they're not protecting their own domestic workers. The opposite. They're protecting foreign sources that they import. Like Quebec, I'd have to check the stats, but I believe they are still the province that imports the highest amount of foreign energy, including from OPEC countries like Iraq, Saudi Arabia, and Algeria. So it's not like this ban on oil and gas development is protecting a domestic industry from foreign competition. It's the reverse. It's the only case I can think of where a government bans a domestic industry to protect foreign sources. Like Quebec imports oil and gas from other jurisdictions. Why would it ban its own people from doing so? It's so backwards. It's so backwards, Ken.
It's an interesting point. I mean, it is a good question as to why you would actually ban economically beneficial activity in your backyard in order to preserve it in someone else's. I think the most remarkable thing, though, is when, as you said, we generally ban people from doing things because we know they're going to engage in harm, either harm to themselves or harm to others. And again, if you look at the data on fracturing, 1 million wells, as you said, in the United States, barely any evidence at all of perhaps one water contamination incidents, according to a review in Science magazine. A couple of 100,000 cases in Alberta. Again, virtually no evidence of environmental harm or harm to people. And yet, there is certainly evidence of the economic benefits of the activity as you look around the world and look at the boom in the United States especially.
Yeah.
So it is hard to understand why, where these bans come from, except through the lens of political activism and environmental groups who are determined to keep as much fossil fuels of any sort, as much hydrocarbons of any sort as they can in the ground. And they see Canada as a place where they can manipulate the system to get that done, as opposed to going to places like Russia and China and protesting against their hydrocarbon development, where it's basically you take your life in your hands if you try that.
Well, you know, I take your point there, but I want to disagree with you just very slightly, because I don't actually believe that Greenpeace is anti-oil. I've never seen a Greenpeace protest against Saudi Arabia, Iran, Venezuela, places like that. I'm not talking about going there and putting their lives in jeopardy. I'm saying just even in the form of a press release. I do not believe that Greenpeace or other activists like that hate oil. I only believe that they hate Western ethical oil. They don't even rhetorically oppose OPEC. They're not against oil, Ken. They're just against our jobs. We're out of time, but it's great to see you. You keep fighting for freedom and ethical energy. More Source coming up.